All right, welcome everyone to the Paketo Buildpacks weekly working group meeting. Thank you for joining. And let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Cool. Sharing again here the link to the agenda and notes. Feel free to add yourself to attend this list, including your affiliation. Okay. For this session, who would like to take notes? Anyone? All right. I think I can do it unless there's any objection. All right, new faces. I mean, full house today, but not exactly new faces. And all of you are of the team. Thank you for joining. We're glad to see you here. All right, so let's get started by reviewing the outstanding RFCs. I will say, yeah, welcome Ozzy and Emily to joining. So we could get started with the new feature checklist proposal. I believe the latest update was waiting on comments and response. So is there any update or anything you would like to discuss here?
So Emily, the only response, so you obviously responded with even after some additions, it was still unclear on the exact roles that were responsible for each particular step. I think I understand where that sentiment is coming from, but I also am scared to be prescriptive at a high level for exactly what each maintainer set should be doing at every step. I mean, what I tried to do was say that anything that it absolutely required a maintainer contributor to do, I have marked as being required for them to do, and that involves like cutting releases and whatnot. But everything else I wanted to keep within the writing documentation. If the I think that, for a lot of people, you would want the contributor to write documentation, but if that's not necessarily the case because of some other external reasons, you would, not want to prescribe that to a group.
That makes sense. I could see that there's not always like a right answer to who is doing each step in each situation, right? It's like, if you contributor would like to write documentation, we'd definitely take that. If not, we like this feature, so we'll take the PR and we'll document it. I guess my concern is that by adding this checklist publicly in a place that's really contributor facing rather than maintainer facing, without that clarity, it would create confusion maybe where there isn't as much confusion right now, where we sort of like communicate with people on an ad hoc basis.
So in that case, is the placement of this where the problem stems from? So like if we were to maybe put it, I don't know, well, if we like maintainer's working contract, or I don't know what I would call it, but like essentially like, hey, so you're a contributor or a maintainer, please make sure that you're following this set of steps each time that you cut a release to make sure that the process is smooth and the information is available. I don't know where I would put that, but just maybe not necessarily plonk it somewhere in the community repo and call it a day, but put it somewhere else.
Exactly. I feel like walking all the way back to like, who's the audience and what problem is it solving? I think you originally proposed this sort of solving a problem that you as a maintainer had run into, where like it maybe steps were missed and something wasn't released, or wasn't clear how to communicate when something was released or know whether it was released. And so if that is sort of the audience, it's like regular maintainers, I think putting it somewhere for that audience would make it more clear. Whereas this proposal is putting it in contributors, where I think something similar to this would be valuable for contributors, but this version of it, when I put myself in the role of a contributor, I feel more like, oh, there's so many steps I don't want to contribute, even though many of them could be done by a maintainer.
I think I think in that case, then it sounds like almost like the first half of this should go in where it's like, hey, so you've identified a feature, maybe come and discuss, like the size of that, open an issue, if it's, reasonable or needed, open an RFC and then contribute, or, like having that sort of discussion of like, what's the best way to approach with like a feature request or even feature contribution. Maybe that needs to be in something else.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think maybe you just want two communications for two different audiences.
Yeah, Sam, I don't hate the idea of like just a maintainers.md in like, or in the is there a maintainers? There's a teams, but like in a maintainers.md, and that could even have like other things, like maybe even like an easier breakdown outside of governance of like what is needed to add contributors, like that sort of thing.
I think like if the purpose of this RFC is tracking, you can potentially do better. You can maybe have like issue templates in your repository where the feature requests are put in, and like you can label them if needs RFC or can be implemented. Once it's ready, you can include something in the PR checklist. So things that you have around like integration tests and those things could go in the PR checklist, including like a item there that says either document the thing or create an issue to document it. So like the least they can do is create an issue. And then ideally all of this, you can, if you want to, you can track it using a project board. So like the issue that they've created, you can track that all the way ending up into some builder, and the documentation issue that they've created, you can track that going out into the docs website. So that way it's more visible to them what the state of their PR is. And you also know that, okay, this column has like this feature still pending and like it's not been released, or it's not been included in the meta build pack, or it's not been included in the builder. So like I need to perform that step. And you can easily build automation around it as well. So like if it's bumped up, the current Paketo bumper can update the project status to just move it automatically.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'll take a crack at just changing up the format that this is. Maybe not format, but like the maybe the format. I don't know. I'll take a look at potentially taking it and trying to apply it somewhere else. I might draft this if that's the case for a little bit and then pull it back up, because I currently don't have a ton of time to work on this at the moment. But yeah, we'll see.
All right, great. Any other comments? Okay, moving to the next one, proposal to publish images to the ECR.
I think this has been sort of blocked a while on a conversation about like whether we want to open up Pandora's box of distributing the images more places, and if so, what our criteria is. For me, I still stand behind the idea that I think it would create a more seamless experience on major cloud providers, and that we intuitively kind of know what those are. I haven't heard as much from the AWS folks lately, but I can try to pull them back into the conversation. In the beginning, when I opened this RFC, they were sort of like DMing me regularly to follow up, but have been less communicative lately. I guess my question is like, do people want me to try to pull them into this conversation? Like, would that meaningfully change how you feel about it? I feel like if the general feeling is we don't want to do this, like that's fine. Like I think it's a good idea, but if overall people don't agree with that, then like maybe we just don't want to do it and we should close it.
I felt like a lot of pushback came from the fact that we weren't necessarily seeing the request come from the affected party. So yeah, I don't know. Unless I've out of touch with this, I felt like the reason we wanted to pull some of the people in from AWS is to hear more about like their exact use case and understand it, and then like
Yeah,
be able to
I'm
make a
definitely
more
happy to
informed
do
decision.
that. I'm just sort of looking for some clarity on like what would change people's minds if they saw it. Basically, it's like what do we need in order to feel good about this? So I can try to bring them into that conversation if people feel like that would materially help. But yeah, like I think the reason I'm asking this is because one answer that came up is like if we could have some sort of metrics that would help us gauge usage with a level of granularity that we can say like, oh, this is definitely worth it. But I think that's sort of impossible given what's out there in the world right now.
I don't fully get what Paketo as a project would gain from that. If they see benefit in having it in an ECR, it's quite easy to set up automation to pull it in there if they need it there. So what's our motivation to go there would be a question. One thing I could see is why not actually publish it to the major cloud providers out there, but then I wouldn't know why choose one specifically while we are building back on another one where we actually do publish or did publish to. I think the new builders, the Gemi builders, are actually not published there any longer. At least I've read it somewhere. I wouldn't understand that movement. Well,
Will
why
people
there
feel
and
better
not
about
everywhere?
this if I updated it to be like Azure, ECR, and Google? Because I would love to do that. I was just assuming like take one slice of the salami first, but I guess the reason I see benefit to us is sort of controlling our own namespace and story in these different cloud environments. So that if people are looking for Paketo Buildpacks on AWS, like we're giving that canonical answer. And the public ECR now has a nice GUI that people use to search for images who are in that ecosystem, and other Buildpack images are there. But yeah,
Sure.
I
And
agree. It doesn't make sense to
there's like
yeah.
And there's like the rate limiting from Docker Hub and other things that could actually make problems for people. So I just don't get why one and not another, and actually dropping one and adding another. I mean, I understand there was a concrete request from the AWS side, but that's like, yeah, my gut feeling would be either it's the major cloud providers or it's whatever target we choose, but then a single one, I guess. But like,
I think maybe this was just a strategic failing on my end here, where I thought it'd be easier to start with one and get people behind that, and then if that went well, we would expand. But if it makes more sense to start with all of them, I like all of them better than none of them.
I've got no really strong opinion on that, irrespectively of how much my opinion would count in this. But it's like, isn't there another RFC that is deprecating the publishing to DCR? So actually, it looks a bit like, anyway, whatever.
Yeah, I sort of regret that one. I don't think we should have deprecated GCR personally. I would like to go publish to all the major cloud providers if the cost is within reason and the foundation is willing to pay for it, which it seems like they are.
We also have the kind of cleanup rules RFC that went into effect too, which caps some of the cost, as well. Might be more palatable that way. I'd be in favor of that. I think that RFC would have to also spell out that those are the specific ones that we're publishing to, and that if others come up, that you'd have to basically open a new RFC and use case for those.
So maybe the action item here is I can just update this to be all the major cloud providers, and then it will feel less weird and we can move forward. All right.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, next up, the web servers re-architecture proposal. I saw recent comments from Emily. An approval. I was wondering if there's any other comment about this proposal.
I think this is ready to merge.
Okay. Okay, to merge. Good. Okay, next. The RFC to include libs to Tiny that are needed for Node. It has some recent activity from the author himself, from Daniel. So wondering.
Yeah, I found another use
Yeah,
case
please.
that this would enable. I'd forgotten about it, but there is one of the JVMs that the Java Buildpack supports, which didn't run on Tiny because it's missing this C++ library. So that could be one more possible use case or reason to include this. I'm not sure where we're stuck at on this or what people's feelings are at the moment.
I've always felt conflicted about this one because I definitely see the pros, but I see the cons too, which is that I think people have been really attentive to image size and image bloat lately. And when folks are evaluating things, they like to, build something and then, compare the image size to other related tools, things like that. So I feel like minimizing that is just, it's both a good security strategy and a good PR strategy. But, it's like a tiny bit of bloat on everything that doesn't need it versus like enabling like a actual minimal image for Node. There's a lot of Node users, right? I feel like in the ideal world, we could sort of, I said this before, like tailor stacks to different language ecosystems. And maybe we can do that someday when there's Docker files, although I think that might be too slow, or, if we do language specific builders. So
Because like I think I got my team to add some updates there. So for Node to be realistic, like to get really all the examples running, we actually also had to add, well, right now a bash, but there's also a pending PR from our side to change npm start to actually use a smaller one, like simple sh, to get a lot of those that actually have a start script running. We also have an SAP internal JVM that's also dynamically linked. So the same problem basically as the one Daniel found. And yeah, actually, like if you like, you can look at it from the angle of the size increase for Java Buildpacks, but it's shrinking quite tremendously for I think quite some Node packages. I started the conversation about this before we opened that PR. I think Sophie was in that as well, where I proposed to that at some point in time we might actually want to reach out to the Paketo Node community to get some opinions from users, which would be like requiring the Paketo channels, I guess, to get the best spread of that. So maybe we should also try to do something like that. Reach out if there are Node developers that would be interested in something like that, and we might actually be able to hand them something where they can try out if their apps would run on this stack to get some more data on this. If that results in the end in a second tiny stack for keeping the one for Java small and having a separate one for Node or a joint one or whatever, we would see. But it could be interesting to actually reach out, I guess, to get some user feedback on that.
I think on the size front, historically, this hasn't been a Node versus Java or whatever conversation. It's been a Node and Java versus Go conversation. Go is also in the tiny, on top of the tiny builder. And the folks in that, like, historically show up in Slack and are like, why is my image 12 megabytes? My binary is like, 800 kilobytes or whatever ridiculous thing they're like, how dare Buildpacks have all this extra stuff in this image, right? And so we get this kind of like indignant response from some folks in the Go community around size and security posture. So like for them, we might want to introduce some sort of like scratch image or something along those lines if we were to go this route.
I was about to say, isn't tiny way too large for a statically linked Go binary?
Yeah.
Totally. It already
Is
was,
it?
right? So adding even more
I mean,
stuff to it is like, right? They're going to complain even more.
I mean, CGO enabled or disabled might make a difference, but like depending on your settings, you actually just need a scratch image with some metadata, right? And the user said or something like that.
Yeah, that's what we do. We just have a scratch stack for Go.
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't introduce something like that, right? And then tiny just becomes like, yeah, it's tiny, but it's not really like the smallest one.
All right.
I think I'm fairly convinced that what we want to do, convinced by the arguments we can move forward with this. Although we do need to draw the line somewhere. And I draw it at bash or shells. I'm thinking no shells. But that we should come back with an answer for Go. Like if this is already not working for Go, like I don't think Java users are going to complain about this really. Maybe some of the native image folks, but.
I mean, depending on when Dockerfile RFC is actually landing and how it works and how we can apply it, we could actually go for the only stack we have is a scratch stack, and all the builders just define on what in addition they need to bring. Stackless
would make it.
Yeah, it's got performance problems though.
Yeah. I think the better option is that you have one single build image that contains everything, and then the run images are different based on the language. Like just switch the run image for Go, you have scratch. For this, you have whatever. That way, like at least for the end user, it's one builder. They don't have to worry about 5 builder and choosing the perfect one for their language.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
All right. Great. Thank you. Any other comment about this proposal?
I'm actually
All right.
not sure what the next step would be for us, or if there's an expectation for us to do. Like we opened that one. Like, I don't know where exactly the next step is going to happen. If that's on our side, and then what we would need to do, or if it's on the maintainer side, then I can just wait for next conversation steps.
I think the scratch stack thing concept is reasonable. I'm not even sure we need to include it in a builder. It seems reasonable for us to just have a scratch stack that just kind of hangs out there that we cut a version of one time probably, because it literally doesn't have anything in it. And it would be reasonable for folks to like at build time, just specify, I want this ultimately to land on the scratch stack.
Like with the run image setting.
Yeah, exactly. At least just to start. I think if we had that, then any conversation about, oh, this bloats the tiny stack kind of goes, kind of gets out of the way. We don't have to have that conversation any longer.
I think for this particular RFC, at least, I'm convinced enough by this conversation, and I don't think we need to answer the scratch thing in this, right? We can probably move ahead with this RFC and then come in with something for Go afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment besides all the great comments in the chat about this proposal? Oh man, this thing went off the rails. All right, so let's move to the next proposal. Addendum for removing mixins on Jammy. Yeah, I believe this one's okay to merge. Is that correct? Or is there any other?
Looks like
I
it.
think that was the answer last week already, right? So somebody could have hit the merge button already.
All right.
Yeah, Ryan.
I feel like I always merge these things, but I will do it again this week.
Thank you. Right, next up, the proposal to make all builder build pack less. Open for discussion, open for your feedback. So this is a good place for it.
Yes, so there's been a little conversation on this since last week. And I guess I didn't realize that the idea of doing something like squash, like dash squash for some of these builders would be desirable or a thing that would be wanted upstream. But it sounds like, Dan, you talked about it in the Slack a couple of weeks ago, and then Sam, you came right in on this and was like, why don't we just add dash squash? So I guess my question is, should I just even keep this open and just close it out in favor of going upstream and proposing a flag for pack?
I'm pretty uncomfortable with only build pack lists just because of the performance implications, especially depending on, like the size of your base image or the size of your build packs. The way pack uses the -p flag is kind of slow. And like maybe that's okay for some users, but having it be the only option feels bad to me. So I'd rather go with the squash option for the getting started. And then if we wanted more optimization in the future, I'm curious about language specific builders.
I brought that to my team's daily as an interesting after the discussion last week. And one of the comments was, yeah, Nix is doing something similar. Like they can also build container images. And I think they just have single layers up to 90 and then or 99, and then the 100th layer is squashing everything else together. So you can even have kind of a mix mode for as long as you don't need so many layers, you actually have it layered, but you can actually go over that. Anyway, just an interesting for the discussion.
There are lots of things Pack does wrong currently when it tries to build composite like meta build packs, and when it tries to combine multiple meta build packs together in a builder, including like putting duplicate layers everywhere. I don't know if that was ever fixed, but like you could also fix some of these issues by just fixing the duplicate layers part. That'll already get you down to like the exact number of build packs that you have, because I know like a bunch of build packs are repeated in each meta build pack.
Get some breathing room. We got to squash our stacks down to one layer. One thing I think would be interesting to see upstream is that like right now in a meta build pack, you have to explicitly say what version of a component you want. Could be cool if it was a range, and then it would just take the latest. And then when you put all the things together on a builder, you get the, only the number you need to meet everyone's requirements. rather than every version, but that's like a whole bigger thing upstream. That's
Yeah.
even more aggressive than Sam's suggestion that we just like fix some of the dumb things, which would be a good start.
Yeah. There's like, at least I think the RFC was motivated by the fact that you're close to hitting the layer limit, right? And if we can relieve some of that pressure by just fixing the pack implementation, which doesn't even require an RFC, that's just like a standout bug. Like you can get something quick, fast without putting an RFC. I don't know if this will involve any changes to the distribution bits, like when you're smushing Buildpack metadata. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Since we only described that, yes,
Go
I
on.
think it could cause some changes, at least in like metadata and builders, which is not fully
Yeah.
spec'd right now. But theoretically, you could just make it. You can make it work, but
Yeah, the
There might
reason
be-
I'm concerned is like
Yeah.
how these build packs would be used in Kpack. Like pack changes it fine. Like
yeah,
other
Kpack
platforms,
has some assumptions on,
which is not
Uh,
spec'd out anywhere.
I do like the idea. Like, first of all, it'd be great if we could try to reduce unnecessary layer use and come up with long-term solutions. It would be really nice, though, to get into the project some sort of escape hatch, so we never have to ask ourselves again, what if we hit the layer limit?
Yeah.
Like, it'd be nice, like, oh, if we hit the layer limit, we squash. Let's never worry about that as something that will break again. And then everything else is just optimizing because it's nice and smaller and faster. So I think it could be worth going through a little pain to at least like not have this conversation.
I think there's also other things we could do on Paketo side as well, like make some sort of tooling to or make an understanding that like, hey, maybe you actually want to have your own custom builder as well. It'll be like performant and only have the things that you want in it and that sort of stuff, and have more discussions about making builders as well. Because I feel like, and to your point, Dan, the big thing that we're losing is the like, hey, so you're trying to like build an application, and if we don't have a grab all builder for that, then it's kind of sad because it makes it harder for people to use the build packs.
I think the other thing, which I don't know if it's a consideration for Paketo, is that we allow polyglot apps. I don't remember if the Paketo builders have that order set up where it's just one language per order, or whether it allows for some combination. But if you do end up in that polyglot scenario somewhere in the future, you'll have to, like, if this RFC makes it through, then you'll have to figure out what to do with polyglot apps. Like then for each combination of languages, you'll have to like either ask your users to dynamically like use the -b flag, or like if you're providing language specific builders, then it'll be a combinatorial explosion.
We like haven't historically supported just like arbitrary mixtures of polyglot applications for the like combinatoric explosion problem you're describing. The ones we do have are like ones that are very widely known and like accepted in the community. Like Rails has a whole asset pipeline that uses node related stuff. So there's a bunch of like node build packs that appear in the Ruby build pack because of that fact. And there's like some other places where those things happen. So we've done it like explicitly where there are like known use cases of these like polyglot applications, but we haven't just opened it up to just like, you can have a PHP application that has some Java process or something it interacts with. That's like not a thing we have support for.
We support polyglot if one of your languages is Node, basically.
Exactly, since that stuff seems to leak into everything.
Yeah, interesting.
The two things I thought that were at least things we could do almost immediately without needing to go through an RFC was talk about squashing all the stuff in the stack. So like the stacks have like, you know, this preamble of 6 or 8 layers that come on the front of every builder. And the question is whether or not it's that much of an optimization for us to have those as separate layers. The idea being like, if you've got multiple instances of that container running on the same Docker daemon, then you would have like duplicate copies effectively of those bytes if the stacks they were running on were different. But the probabilities of you having instances where your applications have stacks that are different is probably really low, considering that like when a stack gets upgraded, all the apps usually at that point in time like upgrade to the latest stack. So it might not be a concern on that front for us to just go ahead and squash the stack always. That might save us a few layers. The other one is I know Victoria was working on some like linter workflow or something for our builders that basically would just tell us, hey, you have duplicates of these 3 build packs. You probably can change the version numbers in some of your meta build packs in order to make, save 3 or 5 layers or whatever those things are.
Yeah, I am working on that. I was supposed to create a new issue actually, but I haven't gotten around to that. But yeah, I am.
I think even beyond that, like one of the things that Dan suggested was just a release cadence. So weekly, every Wednesday, we just make sure that we cut a release of all of our meta build packs, and that what should keep, because a lot, I did some checking to see what versions we're actually at, and it's a lot of, like we have 2 different versions of watch exec across 2 different meta build packs. We have 2 different versions of, like a lot of the utility build packs, because they get updated and they're in every, meta build pack. But I think the conclusion that I'm coming to is that I should close this RFC because it sounds like for like right now, the move to language specific RFC or language specific builders, or this is build pack list. So, but like, it sounds like we would want to opt for something like language specific builders if we were going to go anywhere. That seems to be the sentiment. And so I don't know that I see this becoming popular enough to ever merge. So I think I might close this out.
Is there someone that was going to take an action to open an issue or something upstream with Pack based on the things we talked about?
I mean, I could take a look into doing that.
Okay. I just want to make sure that conversation we had, which seemed very good, didn't just fall on the floor.
All right. Thank you all. Any other comment?
Just one to the idea of squashing stacks. I guess for the tiny stack, this sounds easy enough, but for base and full, this would be a really, really huge layer, wouldn't it? So I guess I'd rather look into how we can make Pack start squashing layers so that you don't have to care about it in terms of having like a hard limit, but rather in terms of how you want your layers to be.
Are stack images larger than 100 MB or something?
The full one is like 400 and something, I want to say.
The build image.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even if we don't get down to a single layer, we could look at removing some layers, I guess. So it's like if you change metadata, you don't have to get a new copy of everything, but things that are likely to change together go together. Maybe we're already there. I don't know. It's at least worth looking.
All right. Wow. They're big numbers. Thank you, Rob, for sharing. Okay, any other comment about this proposal?
Just one last thing that came to my mind. We should probably definitely prepare for Dockerfile extensions coming into the play, right? Where we don't know how many other layers might get introduced in between.
mean, we're already there because anyone can just say -B and add more build packs. And that's usually where
True.
they're running into the layer limit today, which is like we're
True.
under the limit, but they added, 5 build packs and now we're over.
I think we discussed the layer issue when the Docker files RFC was written, or I remember speaking about this with Natalie. I don't know if we actually implemented something, but we did discuss this thing upstream, and I think this should be something that the lifecycle solves.
Great. All right. So time to move to the next one. Web servers depth management. A recent proposal.
Yeah, this is a pretty straightforward proposal. Just talks about how we want to manage web service dependencies going forward as we simplify how we do things for all the language families. So I just have to update this PR to remove Node Engine and Yarn. But after that, this should be good to go. Oh, okay. I just saw this comment here, sorry.
That's okay. I just made it right before this meeting, so. I think the end result here would be slightly different than what we're doing with the compilation, where I think we're sort of like, from what I understood based on the RFC, we're not using the internal CA store node and instead always using the system store. But I think you could use configuration options to sort of like append the system store to the internal store, which would give us a chance to use the upstream without rebuilding. I don't know, like to what extent, like maybe that's desirable because some people, are testing with Node locally and they're used to having the things in that store. Or maybe it's undesirable because we're changing to accept all these CA certs that we're not controlling at the stack level.
I'm not even sure that this even matters anymore because GME having moved to OpenSSL3, like this functionality in Node does not work at all. And you actually have to like override the location of the CA stores, which we're already doing in the Node engine build pack, I believe. So we ran into this, like that flag is like, we still set it because we might end up on Bionic right now. But for GME, at least going forward, there's like, that flag doesn't do anything basically.
So maybe we could use the upstream binary then. Cool.
Okay.
Like each one we don't have to compile is a win.
So this will most likely be moved to a separate RFC for Node Engine specific dependencies.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment? Right. And finally, an RFC about builder config, authored by Sam.
I'm a bit divided on this one. But I think I can explain the reasoning behind why this exists and what it does. So oftentimes there are like, especially for enterprise users, the base builder remains the same. What's changing between build packs are environment variables like Go proxy or the index URL or something else. So like mostly things that can be either configured by adding files to the builder, either in the build user's home directory or by setting these environment variables. The file version works fine because the lifecycle doesn't do with any files on the build image, but the environment variables version doesn't. So like you can't add random environment variables to the build image because lifecycle strips all of them out except for an allow list when it does the build process for a bunch of security reasons. And what that means is if we want to customize the builders or the build image to actually hold the proxy specific configuration and leave all of your build packs as is so that they can be reused as much as possible. There's no good way of doing it at a builder level that just works. So the current options are you provide a binding, which you have to provide for each and every application invocation, which is mildly annoying and also error prone because operators can't control user bindings provided by users. So like, let's say the registry or the proxy URL for Go proxy updates. Now they have to tell all of them that, hey, update your binding to use this thing or whatever. And the other issue is that like, let's say this was provided by some build pack instead that runs at the start of the order, sets all these environment variables. The issue with that is that won't work during detect time. So let's say you want to set some, like some build pack is looking at environment variables during detect time to decide its behavior rather than at build time. There's no way of modifying that behavior. And the last thing is like, even if you want to, you can't change user inputs or like modify user inputs in any way based on the builder. So like, to give you an example, let's say we have like a general arguments flag to some build pack and the user provided a set of arguments to it and you want to append a few more arguments that point to the proxy or the index URL or whatever for pip. There's no way of doing that while keeping like the user's input intact. They will always override any environment variables that the build pack has set. So what this RFC does is it allows you to specify a file in the builder or the build image, which libraries like libpack and packet can look at before actually executing the build process. If they find it, they will try to parse it. And you can roughly set environment variables 4 ways. So there's the default mode, which is the default. So if an environment variable is set in default mode, it will not override any user provided arguments. If the build or if the operator chooses that, hey, I want to override this argument no matter what the user provides, they can use the override flag. And then similarly, they have the prepend and append option to like prepend and append to user provided arguments so that they can modify them if needed. And this runs both during detect and build. So before the build pack runs its detect process or build process, it will look at this file and populate the environment variables so that like regardless of whatever is happening, it will always inject the appropriate values. So that's the RFC. And currently, we do have a build pack that is very similar, but it suffers from the limitations I mentioned about build packs, that you can't set detect time variables and you can't override settings in any way, even if you wanted to. So
2 big questions.
yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What I'm wondering about is if we should push that upstream and make this part of the CNB stack. So I guess then it would be something like the life cycle would look at that file and do something about it instead of having a Paketo specific solution. And if it's for timing reasons, because RFCs and solutions might be quicker if done on the lower level, then we should definitely look for how would that work if this eventually makes it upstream.
So I've also linked an upstream RFC and a PR to the lifecycle for that upstream RFC if that does get merged. But I've done the same here. I don't really care where it happens. For me, it's the same whether it gets implemented in the lifecycle of Paketo, because even we end up using Paketo or Libpack, one of those two libraries, to author our Buildpacks anyway. So it doesn't really matter to me. I think for me, it's just like a matter of whether, like, which project is probably more appropriate for this, and to, like, is there any appetite for such a configuration either in CNB or in Paketo? Like, that will be my deciding factor for which of the two RFCs I pursue.
First question I have is, you're talking about in the Buildpack solution, how a detect is the problem because you can't set these things before detect. I'd sort of like to hear, like, to what extent is this really necessary during detect? Do we have examples of when we'd want to be setting this stuff during detect? And then, like, are those examples things that, like, we feel really good about, or maybe a sign that, like, things that should be in build are leaking into detect? Like,
so I think for detect, it's mostly things like, I think it's interesting for us. It's mostly been like, let's say we want to have feature flags turned on and off per builder, and those feature flags are detect level. So I don't have a concrete example because none of those are Paketo Buildpacks, but essentially one Buildpack that might have a feature flag one way or the other, maybe it points to a different file location during detect, which is what it's looking for on some builders. And then for a different builder, it's looking at a different file name during detect for that value. And the name of the file is decided by some other environment variable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've definitely had experiences where, like, I would like to be able to basically, like, change the default value of Buildpack environment variables for a specific builder versus others.
Yep.
I see it less being necessary during detect for things like the specific types of examples that are here, like proxy config and stuff like that. Like, I'd like to plant a flag in the ground and be like, detect should be able to run offline.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I really want to, like, take that all the way, but I think that's, like, the spirit of what I think detect should be like.
Yeah. So all of these flags are currently, like, just that other build pack that I described, that we have that sets this during build, that suffers from these limitations. Like, we managed to get so far with just setting build time flags, but now we are experiencing issues where we need something during detect time and we want to modify user inputs.
I'm just wondering if there's, like, maybe, like, a couple different unique use cases here and, like, how much they can all be put together versus not. Like, the other thing you mentioned was sort of the limitations of using bindings for some of these things. And really don't want to encourage bindings that are, like, a little bit hard. So I don't want to encourage use of bindings in places where you don't need it. But I can imagine a need for bindings here if some of the, like, configuration you want to provide is secret enough that you want to give it the security properties of a Kate secret rather than an image.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something else there that's, like, if we're thinking of a KPAC user's case, like, does KPAC need sort of like a way to have default operator configured bindings that are different than, like, per user? Like, that might be, like, a whole different question, something like that. But
that's again something that we have, so I don't care much about that. And also that breaks the experience when you're using it with Pack.
Yeah,
like,
I wouldn't want to create a situation where people are tempted to be careless with their secrets. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So, like, that's why a bunch of these are like registry URL. So, like, for example, right now in Java Buildpacks, we prescribe people to use bindings for something like settings.xml, even if it does not have secrets.
Yeah.
So that
maybe that's unnecessary.
Yeah.
Seems like there could be more options there.
Yeah.
But also maybe Pack needs something like a Pack config level, like, default bindings, like just always bind these whenever I build anything, that kind of stuff.
But also I feel like that's again different, because I imagine different builders might support different kinds of bindings, and like these are really properties of the Buildpacks and the builder rather than the property of the app that's being built, or like the property of the platform. Like pack, great, you can specify default bindings, but like not all of them are required or necessary for each build. Like here, I'll only specify the required variables at the builder level. So like I know if there's a Go build pack involved in my builder, I will set these values.
I wonder if that's like, I don't know, like I think about, I'm curious like how much I do believe that it's really a builder level concern rather than like an environment level concern. Like if you're imagining just doing Go locally, you know, you might set something like Go proxy in your bash RC file or something, right? Where it's set everywhere. You're not always doing Go, so it's not always being used, but it's the kind of thing that's like a property of the environment rather than a like specific build pack configuration.
I think the interesting thing is like, for us at least, builders define the environment, the build environment at least. So like if you're using a specific builder, then your target use case is like these kind of images. If you're using another kind of builder, then your target use case is like, hey, these images are gonna go get shipped externally or something. Like they have different build images, different run images, different properties. And it's very important for us to keep those separate. Like we don't want like internal settings leaking out to like images meant for external use, or like environments mixing. Like that's the whole reason you have containers, that you avoid this like environment misuse and mixing.
I'm not saying this is a bad idea. I just want to like poke on some of these things because I think sometimes we use builder, especially in the KPAC context. I think builder can be like a proxy for a persona that sometimes doesn't exist in the pack context. It's like an operator that's configuring something on behalf of multiple users. The most convenient place to do that in KPAC is in a builder. It's like, does that persona even exist in a pack case? What does it mean? And then to what extent are things, I don't know, I want to be like a little bit rigorous about like, is that the right choice? Like throw everything into the builder because of the operator. That's an operator persona concern. And if that is like, that's actually great. And we should just like codify that and run with it. But maybe in other cases where it's like Paketo is distributing builders to a variety of communities where they're being used, like, you know, that's not a place where you'd be, you know, setting your Go proxy.
Yeah, definitely. So like, so Paketo will ship a builder without this config toml. If someone takes it and wants to use it in their enterprise, they just need to, from Paketo builder, full add config toml, create menu builder, done.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, is that really like the workflow we would end up with if we hadn't made specific decisions in KPAC that's like you're always building the builder from scratch, stuff like that. Right.
Even if you're like in the case I described this for pack, and you're not building the builder from scratch, right? You're just taking the existing builder and adding a file to it.
Yes, but I feel like some version of that would be more natural in KPAC. Like that proposed workflow is like a little bit awkward in pack as a place to inject this config.
Why would it be awkward in pack?
Like, are you asking every pack user to go and extend each builder image as it comes out, or is one person extending it and then publishing it again, and then everyone's pulling it?
So this is mostly for like enterprises, right? Where there's an operator persona who's defining the base images for everyone. It's not like I'm taking this thing and I'm customizing it for each and every developer. Like it's taking this, customizing it for my whole organization.
And actually, like the users of Pack could even just mount that file into the run, right? You don't even have to create a new builder for it. you could mount such a config toml file and whatever else is needed because it's referenced in there for the single run you do with Pack. So even that would be a use case. I mean, that's not with Pack, but it's like, that's why we didn't run into that problem, I think, right? We do have our own registries for NPM and Maven. So there's these two settings files that we have to set for all users. We've just done it in a centrally used Jenkins file. So we just do the binding for everyone. So that's why we at SAP didn't need something like this before, but we might use it for that as well. Like,
yeah, I think
so
the
we've
issue is
baked it into the CI/CD stuff instead of baking it into the builder, but
Yeah.
we have a similar use case, right? For pointing to a specific Maven repository or a specific NPM registry.
the issue with baking it in the CI system, which we could have also done, is that it makes it non-portable. So if someone's
Yeah,
trying it
sure.
locally, then they have to know, okay, you're setting all these magic things in the CI that I now have to replicate. And like if the CI values change ever, like let's say you now have a new registry, you have to now inform all the users that for local usage, you're now supposed to use this new file instead of the one that comes with the builder. So like instead of you giving like a single thing, which is like, use this builder, it will never break, it will always work. You now have to tell them, hey, you need to add these extra files.
We're over time. So
yeah.
I wonder if we should come back to this because it's an interesting conversation. I imagine some of the folks that have to drop would be curious about it. I think some level of builder configuration is appropriate. I just want to like have the fun conversation with all the different options.
Great, thank you all. Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. We over the hour. So before anything else, I would like to say thank you to the user identified as H Wibble for joining. We are happy to have you here. And also thank you to Teal Clam Pakel. Thank you for joining. I'm wondering if you're the same Teal who have provided a lot of insight on this issue, Buildpacks support for Symfony 5.
Yeah, I did. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just want you to know that the team is so happy to see your insight and your contributions to this issue. Thank you for that. So yeah, we have some stuff here, updates, more discussions, the MIA friendly meeting times. Yeah, absolutely. I will create an issue for this. And with that, I will give you the freedom. Thank you for joining and hope to see you in the next one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.